Today's project is going to be making fabric bins or cubes. I love me a good cube to go in a cubby to organize stuff. So I thought I would make some cute ones out of some fabric that I found at Walmart. I found some of their pre-cut fabric. This one is 1 yard, this one's a half yard, and this one's got, looks like it has chickens on it. I think the half yard one was like $3.97 or something like that. And the full yard one was like $4 something. So super affordable, easy way to get some fabric because pretty much everybody has a Walmart by them. Oh, this one's really pretty. Look at that fabric. Oh my gosh. Cannot wait till chick season to get here. It's going to be so much fun. Okay, so this is going to be the outside. This is going to be my lining. And then I also have here a bolt of flex foam. This is Pellon flex foam. This one's naked, has no coating on the outside of it. And this one's not fusible. They do make a fusible version of this. Or you can spray adhesive it with like quilting basting spray to your lining fabric. So we're going to cut out all of our pieces. And today I'm going to make the large size one for my pattern. We're going to cut 2 squares out of each one of these fabrics measuring 15 inches wide and 13 inches tall. So a half yard piece will work perfect for this. And if you have a directional print, you want to make sure that you're doing the measurements the correct way so that your chickens will be facing the right way on your cube. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out both of those, 2 squares of your outside, 2 squares of your lining, and also 2 squares of your interfacing. Now you can use this flex foam stuff, you can use Decor Light, you could use quilt batting, just something that's going to give it some body to help it stand up. So let me get those cut out. Okay, so we need to cut some squares out of the corners of the bottoms of our squares that we've cut out so that we can make boxed bottoms. So we're going to cut a 4-inch by 4-inch square on the bottom of each one of these fabrics and our foam. So in order to do that, you can use the template provided in the pattern, or you can just mark it on your fabric with a ruler and then cut it out with scissors or your rotary cutter. So I'm going to mark this in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to measure up 4 inches and make a little mark, draw our line, and then go across 4 inches and make sure it's square so that we get nice, sharp, boxed corners. So we're going to do this on the other side. And then I'm going to use my scissors to cut these out so that I don't cut into the corners with the rotary cutter. Because if you cut this with a rotary cutter, you're going to have to cut pretty far in. And sometimes you can cut over that line. So I'll just do this with my scissors. And then we're also going to do that with our outside fabric. And if you make sure that all of your layers are lined up perfectly, you can cut all of this at one time. I'm just going to use my lining as a template to draw these on. And then I'm going to cut these also. And then we're also going to cut our foam. Okay, now that we have all our pieces cut out, I'm actually going to try to sew this without sticking the lining to the foam. If you have the fusible foam, I would definitely fuse it to it, but if not, we're going to see how it goes. Okay, I have made a little sandwich for my lining. I have got a piece of foam, my 2 lining pieces with the right sides together, and my other piece of foam. And I'm going to sew this bottom seam, and I'm going to leave an opening about 3 to 4 inches in the middle where I've backstitched on either side to leave this open to turn the whole thing through in the end. So I'm going to take some of my clips and I'm going to clip them together. And this foam is pretty forgiving to sew over. I've used it a lot when I've done by Annie patterns and I've quilted them. So I like it. It may be too much for some sewing machines, but if you've got a machine that can handle it, it does squish down pretty easy to go under the presser foot. So I'm going to make sure that I got all my layers lined up. And I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine. And I'm going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the beginning and the end. Now remember, we're going to stop and we're going to start again over here, so we leave an opening in the middle. Okay, so we've sewn both of those and we have an opening here to turn this through, and hopefully that this will be big enough. Now we're going to set that aside and we're going to take our front pieces and we're going to put them right sides together, and we're going to sew the bottom seam all the way across on those. This one I'm not even going to pin together or clip because I can hold it together and sew it pretty easily. Back stitching at the beginning and the end. Now I'm going to take this over to my iron and I'm going to press this seam allowance open. Okay, now that we have the bottom seam sewn, I brought this over to my cutting table so maybe you can see it a little bit better. This is what it's going to look like when you unfold it. Now you may have to do a little bit of trimming here and there. That's okay. We can do that in the end. But we're going to take this, put it right sides together again, and we're going to sew the side seams. So I'm going to clip these together so they don't shift while I'm sewing, making sure I'm getting everything lined up. And just add clips all the way up the side. And then we're going to do the same with our front piece, our outside piece. Got a little bit of the selvage on this edge. That's okay. It won't show once I sew my seam. All right, we're going to take this back over to our sewing machine and we're going to sew up all of these side seams at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, we are ready to sew our sides. So I'm going to take my piece that is the lining piece with the foam first, and we're going to sew our sides at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And it's okay if all this stuff doesn't quite match up here at the top, because we're going to trim some of this foam out of this top seam allowance anyway. Be sure to back stitch at both the beginning and the end to lock in those seams. And then we're going to do our outside fabric the same. We're going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, we're going to trim the seam allowance of the foam only down by about half. That will create less bulk in your seam allowances. And then around the top, you're going to trim this off at the top, the foam only, by about 1/2 inch. Mine was cut a little bit short, so I'm just straightening it up here at the top. but you want your lining fabric to stick out about 1/2 inch. For some reason, mine cut or shrank up while I was sewing it just the right amount. There we go. Okay, I'm not sure if you can see Goose down here. Goosey. Hey, Goose. Goosey, look. All right, so we are going to put our, okay, move out of the way, Bubba. Say hi, Goosey. Goosey, say hi. Okay, bye, Goose. Now we're going to box the corners, so we're going to take where we cut out the squares and we're going to open it up diagonally. And we're going to match up the bottom seam to the side seam and clip that together. I like to nest my seam allowances, so one going one way and one going the other way. That way it's just a little bit less bulky right there at the seam. I'm going to put a clip right there on the seam allowance, and now you're going to make sure that your fabric is coming all the way up to the edge, and you're going to clip all the way across the boxed corner. Now we're going to take this to our sewing machine and we're going to sew at 1/2 inch seam allowance across this corner. Be sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. And repeat on the other side. And now your cube lining will stand up on its own. So we're going to repeat these corners on the outside fabric. We're going to repeat the same thing on our outside fabric by pulling the corners at a diagonal, matching up our side seam with our bottom seam. We're going to clip those in place and we're going to sew across here at 1/2 inch seam allowance also. Now we're going to take our right sides of our cube and we're going to turn it right side out. We're going to poke out those corners and we're going to put it inside the lining and foam cube. We're going to match up our side seams and we're going to clip all the way around the top edge. Now we're going to take this to our sewing machine and we're going to sew at 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around this edge. Be careful and don't catch your foam in that seam allowance. Okay, I was wrong. 1/4 inch seam allowance around the top. Okay, when you get back around to where you started, you're going to back stitch to lock it in. Now we're going to turn the whole thing right sides out through that little opening that we left in the bottom. This is called birthing the bag. You just need to go slow and don't pull on the seams edges where it's sewn too hard so that you don't pop any stitches. Okay, once you have it turned right side out, poke your corners out. And then we're going to take this little hole right here and we're going to pinch together the seam allowance. So wrap your fabric around the foam a little bit. And you're just going to kind of pinch it together. You may want to use a couple of clips. You can hand sew this. That's perfectly fine too. I just like to do it quick. So I'm just going to take it to my sewing machine and sew that together. Okay, I just sewed this together. At the bottom, it's going to be on the inside of your cube, so it doesn't have to look pretty or beautiful or anything like that. So I'm going to trim off my threads, and now I'm going to take that and push it down into the outside fabric. And you may have to fidget with the foam a little bit where it was loose at the top to get it to unfold and stand up straight. You want to poke your corners out with your fingers. Make sure your corners all match up. And now I'm going to take it over to my ironing board and I'm going to give it a good press all the way around. Now that I've given it a good press all the way around, I'm going to top stitch around the top edge, making sure that my seam at the top is right at the top of the foam. So you're going to sew through the foam in the outside and the lining, top stitching it in place. Okay, I changed out to black thread to make it match a little bit better, but I'm going to start at a side seam and I'm going to top stitch at 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Make sure that your seam matches up with the top of your foam and that you're stitching through all 3 layers. I'm going to trim my threads. And there is our finished cube. I'm going to go give it one more good press, and then I'll take some good photos of it.